What is up, everybody? Jason Tracy got Julia Keider on Coffee and Grit today. This is going to be a phenomenal episode for you to tune into. If you're in the box in your career and you've been thinking about starting a business for quite some time, Julia is going to talk about how she took her career from teaching into a lucrative and especially passionate coaching career. Check it out. What does it take to be a successful entrepreneur? A dangerous amount of coffee and a ton of grit. My name is Jason Tracy, and every week I interview business leaders to share their stories, life lessons, failures, and advice with you. Welcome to Coffee and Grit. What is up? What is up? What is up? Welcome back to another episode of Coffee and Grit. Are you feeling the coffee yet? You got the grit? All right. You know what? I get asked a lot, especially by fellow podcasters, like, how do you find your people? How do you find so many amazing guests that you have on week in and week out? Do you have a struggle? I do not have a struggle. I'm fortunate and blessed to really have to pump the brakes. I like to be a couple months out in my schedule, but I have conversations with people. Like I had a conversation with Julia Keider, you're our guest today, back on January 31st. And I'm sitting here, today's March 31st. And so 2 months later, like kind of recapping, like, what did we talk about? Okay, what's this conversation going to be like? And so I only like to be only a couple months out. I could very easily be a year out. And so people ask me, where do you find your people? And it's a mix of things. One, I get referrals from other guests, or I have people that listen to the shows of other guests and they'll reach out to me and tell me and share their story. A way that I've always have found people the most authentically is going out into the wild, going out into the community, meeting people, where they're at, where they're doing business. And that's the case with Julia. I met Julia at the Howell Chamber Happy Hour a couple months ago, back in January, obviously. And that was a really cool event. I actually met a lot of really cool people there. But Julia is one of those action takers, which I really love. Those are my favorite. Those are the difference makers, right? That are like, I want to be on the show, and then took the steps to do it, because I had about 5 conversations with people, and she's the only one that moved forward and is scheduled on the list, right? And so you gotta, when you want something, like, ask for it, right? It's the simplest of stuff. And so big lesson there. But I've always looked at this podcast as a way to continue building relationships with difference makers in the community. And Julia is one of those. And so it's one of those things where it's like, hey, can I be on the podcast? Absolutely. Let's get you on. Let's share more of your story, especially as I got to know more of her story and how she's making a difference. And I'm really excited to talk about this particular aspect, because I know a lot of people that have been in the teaching industry. And then, they're thinking about starting a business, or they have started a business, and they think that maybe they're just a teacher. How do they make that conversion, right? And those are the difference makers that need to be running their own businesses. And so I'm super excited to talk to Julia about that path. And so Julia, yeah. I'm going to stop looking at the camera now and making it off.
Well, thanks for accepting my invitation to your podcast.
No, and again, and I have, let me be clear, there are people that will reach out to me that are not ready, or that I am really honest with, and I'll say, hey, you know what, maybe your story is not ready to tell, or do these couple things. And that's hard. I had one person that I'm still in my follow-up list, that she was going through a lot of trauma, to where there's so much trauma right now that she's not on the other end of it. And I'm like, I don't know if there's a lesson here for anybody to hear that, so keep going. Yeah. You're on the right path. But it's also an integrity to have on the show. So.
Yeah. And I looked at it as, a way for me to get messaging out about, like, just life after teaching, life as an entrepreneur, life as, all the things, because there's just so many areas of my life that I've really gotten interested in. And as somebody, 50-year-old, just turned 50, just trying to make a go of it. And I know that there are a lot of people in our Gen X that are still looking for that next best thing. And we still have a lot in the tank. And so, I'm excited to share with you whatever part of the story interests you and interests your audience.
I love that you say we have a lot left in the tank. Like, what is 50?
Yeah.
And like, it's one of those things of like, when people when you say 50, it's like, whoa, wow. But then I have to remember I'll be 46 in May. So what is that? Like, oh my God, we're so old, but we're not. Like, I don't feel that way.
No. People say like you're 50 and I'm like, yeah, I mean, physically I don't feel 50, but at the same time, there's a life and a couple of lives in there, with my kids, two kids, 18 and 21. And so there's that life part of it, right? Where you spend your life raising kids and making sure that they're well-adjusted young adults and adults for the future. But 50 for me it's not even a halfway point. Sadly, I lost my parents when I was much, much younger, in my earlier 20s. And that really taught me a lot of lessons just as far as what I want my life to look like. Kind of just a backstory on that. We grew up in Brighton in a community of Ukrainians. And so they were immigrants to this country, full-blown immigrants to this country. Wow. So my parents were 19 years apart, and so my mother got married very young to an older gentleman who was well-known in the Ukrainian community. And so there was that expectation from my father. And then, marrying my mother 5 kids later, right, growing up in a very traditional Slavic neighborhood, and you knew all the family members, and you spoke 2 languages. Don't ask me to speak anything right now because I only know the curse words, okay?
Those are the only things that stick with you.
Yeah, those are the ones, either at me or at somebody else, right? So, I mean, that in and of itself taught me a lot, right? Just in terms of our cultural upbringing, we had traditions that I remember sharing with my friends, like, you do that. And whether it was food related or some of the things that we just did around Easter holiday. And I realized that things were different, right? And with that, I guess, came the story, right? The story evolves just even from infancy and experiencing that, having immigrant parents. And so I have a lot of appreciation for that culture piece when it comes to families. And, certainly my husband and I have carried that over, not so much in the traditional sense, like, oh, we do these traditions, but more along the lines of how we're raising our children, and that future generation is so powerful. And I think when I was a teacher, I still embraced that even before I had kids. So coming to a mindset of anything that you do, right, you're in the moment and you bring all of that with you, whether it's, hey, I remember when I was 5 years old and I really loved to roller skate. There's that element of just that you bring that to the table and what you present, whether it's, for example, a teacher or an entrepreneur or whatever it is you do.
Yeah. It's all like, I had someone tell me, we did a session on Friday, and she told me today, like, this is the first time I feel like I'm just living my life and I'm not doing business. And it's like, that's what it's all about, because it is all those pictures. It is all your experiences. Like, that's why you do what you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that people love that story, right? When I, even just me explaining it here, this is the first time I've ever shared with people, in this public format, my family's history. And, so but cool. If you get close to me, that, but at general face value, you don't, but people are intrigued by that. You said something before we started recording that I thought was so powerful. People don't give themselves enough credit for the story that they bring. And it reminded me of a conversation my husband and I had, and by the way, we've married 30 years, so that's an accolade unto itself.
Absolutely.
As we're talking about this younger generation, our 18-year-old who goes to Michigan State, and our 21-year-old who is an HVAC technician, just like they're both kicking it, right? It's awesome. Is sometimes we don't give kids enough credit for their stories. And so as adults, how do we honor our own story, whatever's going on in our head or however we're running our daily lives. But then those of us that have kids, like, how do you leave space for yourself to calm your own mind to listen to somebody that's 10 years old that might not have their thoughts quite figured out yet? And as adult, kind of just looking in their eyes and paying attention to, like, I wonder what's going on up there, right? And I'm very curious to just know that instead of just like, clouding the space or running activities or doing all the things that don't allow the kid to kind of give themselves the space to think, right? Or I hate to say it, sometimes the technology gets in the way of that too.
I love this conversation where this is going. So how do you hold yourself back? And then two, I love how you said that, because it's like, it's always keeping the mind busy. And we're conditioning ourselves to always be busy and not like sit in that space of discomfort within ourselves.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure it'll come out, so my role as a coach, right, and my consulting business is really modeling a lot of that. So kind of my story to kind of get to that point. And I've always valued the art of listening, just in terms of being that observer, listening to people's body language, listening to people's words, listening to the environment, even outside of that, what's causing people to kind of react the way that they do or interact the way that they do is, back in 2008, I was given the opportunity as a teacher to really take part in getting trained as a coach. And this is when things just started to really resonate and kind of kick in for me. So I was doing the things. I studied communications when I was in college, and I was fully aware of theoretical practices, and I was doing things just being me, right? And when I was trained as a coach in 2008 and started using some of the strategies of coaching with my students is when I started to see how powerful my practices and listening were on their practices of listening. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah. So I was showing them a lot without really even knowing full-heartedly what I was doing. And then eventually I said, I need to tell them what I'm doing so that they understand. When I ask them questions and I pause and I look at them, I would actually have to tell them, there will be times I may ask you a really thought-provoking question. And I don't want you to feel like you have to immediately respond, like there's a yes or no response to it. I'm asking you that question because I want you to be thoughtful. And I want to see the eyes go up, and I want to see the head nod, and I want to see you kind of like sit with it for a second. Whether I was talking about Hamlet or I was talking about writing a college essay, it didn't matter. Just something that helped me see their thoughts in action. And if a result of that was how they communicated back or they talked to a student, side by side, I knew it was working. And then they eventually, over time, I learned like the moments in the environment, like I said before, when they were thirsting for that. They're like, okay, stop talking so we can think. Right? Yeah. And give us the space to think with each other. And that's when it became really, really powerful. So I hope that answers your question, but it says I'm kind of thinking about, the classroom experience that I had and how I was able to model that. And then that in turned into a lot of the style of coaching that I incorporate is really, really being focused and really being in tune with the verbals, the nonverbals, and leaving space for people to kind of think about things, whether it's before I ask a question, after I ask a question, and just giving them the permission to sit with it for a second.
So it's like modeling it, leading by that example, and then you explain to them what you were doing so they could see it.
Yeah, with students in particular, like when I engage in a coaching relationship with a leader, I don't always say it like that right away because I have to address their kind of issues that they're dealing with, or some of the problems of practice, or even like the goals they have in mind. We're just kind of engaging in that. And then at some point, if I have enough longstanding relationship with that coach, which usually is the case, is they'll start asking me like, hey, can you repeat that question? Because I want to write it down because I got somebody else I want to talk to about such and such. And then the conversation flips where I'm no longer like their coach and leader. I'm like coaching the coach, right? Because they want to do that eventually. So yeah, it is constantly modeling, but I have to wait for the right time to tell them what I'm doing.
That's powerful. It's powerful. And I love how the lead in is you're talking about like teaching, for example, but like as you're teaching, you're testing and figuring out your model.
I mean, yeah, I think that's an important part, Jason, of how I was. I mean, it wasn't an easy road to move from teaching, that for sure. But when you make that transition, whether it's I'm retired, right, or I kind of want to move on to, I know there's something else beyond teaching, or it doesn't feel right. Using a lot of the skills that you've honed in on, because while you're teaching, you're learning. You're learning about every single student. You're learning about teaching practices. You're learning about how to interact as a team and work with adults and sometimes lead adults. And when you leave that space, you just wonder, well, like, I'm no longer a history teacher. Like, history is not your jam. Like, it might not be that thing anymore, but it's all the other things in the learning environment that you're going to take with you. And so from that, I mean, there were just basic competencies and principles that I'm like, I can do that someplace else, and it's going to be really, really valuable. And I think that was the thing for me too. When I left teaching, it was a bit of a difficult decision for me. Like, I knew all along I was not going to be a teacher for 25 years. I knew that. And I didn't want to be a principal. Like, there was going to be something along the lines. And it did. Like, the universe gave it to me, and I had to be like, okay, I got to take this. Although small it is, I really, really have to take this. But I knew within that space, I was going to have to take some of what I did and what I learned over those 14 years into something else, something that was way bigger than me and still continues to be bigger than me. And that's kind of what we tackle, and that becomes the journey. But never neglect all the things that you've learned. And I know that there's probably some sour stories out there about teaching. You take those along with like, but I did learn not to do this, and I'm going to take that into another space because I'm working on a new team or a new project or a new volunteer group.
You think about all those experiences and just even the talent, like the skill set, like who you have to be to be able to fit and be a teacher. And one of my things is like we teach kids. There's like these 4 things you can do. You can be, a fireman, a teacher, a cop. You can be a doctor, a nurse, or you can be a professional athlete.
Okay.
There's 6 maybe things that you can be. And so like, as you fit in the box, what I love is opening up that and realizing, okay, you have this skill set. Like, even from your experience, like high level presenting, you're talking about leading people, and you're leading people that are like a captive audience. Like they don't necessarily want to be there.
Well, that was always the interesting thing for me as a teacher is they come to you, right? And when I looked at the 4 quarters of a calendar school year, right? You've got basically 2.5 months, 9 weeks to kind of engage the student. And what is it going to take for you to do that? Are you going to create a clown show? Are you going to create like a work camp? I mean, like, I'm just putting like little metaphors to how we come to the table. And, for me, it was kind of a little bit of both, and really thinking about, I have to engage them. I have to plan these out so deliberately and so creatively at times that it kind of keeps them on their toes for expected yet unexpected. Okay. And so I think about this too, when I think about like hiring, because we didn't talk about me being in HR, and that's a huge part of it, really supporting the employee development portion of how people come to work, right? And I was just thinking about this earlier, that first quarter, essentially the first quarter of someone getting hired is the same as, you teaching students, right? Yep. How are you going to make them feel like they belong? How are you going to create this little classroom community? How are you going to make it exciting for them to come to work or come to school every day? I mean, that's so critical. And kids don't want to come to school and be yelled at. Kids don't want to come to school and just, go through the motions of a robot. And so how do you do that in a creative, engaging, very personalized way? You do have to bring your person to the table with that. And then how do we get to the meat of it? Okay, now let's get some projects going. That second and third quarter, it's really, really crucial. And then by the 4th quarter, and I taught mostly seniors, like, okay, how do I frame this so that I feel like they've accomplished in the first 3 quarters, but they're ready for the next step. So I would be like, okay, you came back from spring break. I know you're like senioritis is kicking in, but I still got more in there for you to engage with in a very fun, very communal way. So that was my goal too, is making them feel like, even though they were going to step away from the classroom and they were all going to go their separate ways, to help them feel like the experience was worth it, right? That community was so worth it for them. And again, that becomes their story, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. Because like it's the people that come into your life and change your narrative. It's the leaders, the teachers, the mentors, the people that come along and make that impact. They crack that shell and then they wrap their arm around you and wrap belief in you.
Yeah. 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 And working with students in particular, I mean, over 14 years, I've met a lot of students, right?
Yeah.
But the luxury now is after 10 years of being out of the classroom, they're adults and they're having their kids and they'll see me in the grocery store. Or it's so funny, Jason, how this world just like, and maybe it's the Livingston County community that people just love this community and they say to themselves, like, I kind of want to stay here. I love the people. I love the connections. I love what it's offered me. They still feel like they're growing and a part of things. I work on the volunteer board for Livingston HR. I have students that have been a part of that amazing. Board, and we've become friends and, colleagues and women leaders. And it's fantastic to have that connection and to still feel like, that came out of you sitting in my classroom in my English class,
It's so cool. And I love how relationships bloom throughout life. You have no idea.
You have no idea. Yeah.
It's like never at any point, I think, if you're that person sitting in your class in high school, do you think, are you going to work with them or be friends with them from that? That's awesome.
You just delivered my kid's baby, like that's kind of crazy, but it's so cool.
Yeah, that's really crazy.
Yeah, I just threw that one out there because I had a former, schoolmate of mine, and I'm like, I think I went to school with you and I was really good friends with you and we used to work together. She's like, are you okay with me delivering your baby? I'm like, absolutely. Weird as it was, I'm like, I wouldn't have it any other way.
I feel like you know me. Now you know me even more.
Now you know me in a very different way.
Hilarious. I love what you said when you said it, it's like reaching into the person. Mm-hmm. And then the other piece too, and I think this is really parallel with employees and, from that HR standpoint, is students don't want to come and like be yelled at or like feel like they suck or they're inadequate. People don't want to go to their job every day and feel like they suck or they're inadequate or feel like they're being yelled at or not understand what they're supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, so when I decided to move away from the classroom after 14 years and pursue really my own coaching and consulting world, but still staying in the educational arena. So I moved, I took some time off and really kind of figured out what I was doing, built the business, started working with a variety of schools in Genesee and Oakland and Washtenaw, just in the general driving distance area. Just so that I could really hone in on those like professional development skills. But, after a short amount of time in 2017, I started working with Baker College and really looking at this from an HR lens is what I was doing. And I finally got a certification in HR and the bridge to me made sense. So as we're talking about like, what is life after teaching, right? I made some deliberate steps in that. So I knew in the world of academia, certification or PhD was going to be important. And I didn't want to give my life up for a PhD. I had young kids at the time. And I'm like, I think I can still do this and build a sense of credibility and expertise just by getting a certification and just, practice the things in my work experience. And so I think it's worked out really well because I can still stay very grounded in that respect. But again, we were talking about taking the things with you to kind of build up on that story. It was letting go a little bit of like that teaching world, so to speak. So I wasn't in front of students necessarily, but the adults and the employees kind of became my students. And sometimes in my coaching conversations with people, especially those that I know that are educators, I say, okay, put your teacher hat back on. Because you're going to lead this meeting, right? Or you're going to have this one-on-one, how would you approach this if this was your student? How would you approach this if this was your classroom? And some of the processes and systems that they know worked as a teacher still work in their leadership capacity. It's just the students are 20 years older, right?
Yeah.
And so I take that philosophy with me when I'm coaching individuals, specifically from an HR perspective, is really right. Let's use the skills that we have and that we know really work and apply them to the current situation. Can we do that? And if we realize that we don't have enough skills or talents to do that, then we need to explore some other approaches.
Yeah, I was like, maybe that's not a fit then at that point.
I mean, sometimes in my coaching conversations, I have to bring forward, I have to lay it out a little bit more in detail because they're struggling with it. They're struggling with how to approach a conversation or how to lead a meeting or how to strategize with their team or how to really unpack their own values to communicate with a team. And so yeah, I still use a lot of my basic teaching practices to hone in on that, because then that person becomes my student, right? And how do I teach that student, whether it's one session or 2 sessions, or how do I follow up online to help them develop a lot of those skill sets and a lot of that understanding. So I'm teaching in multiple modalities in that particular case.
It's like a whole framework, essentially.
I mean, it's a really loosey-goosey framework, if I can say that, but the intentions are always the same. Like, I have to pay attention to, does this person know what I'm talking about? Do they understand what my idea for them in terms of pacing this out, in that conversation? Do they understand that? And if they don't, I have to scale it back. I have to go back to like 0 level, just so that, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
I'm just paying attention to that and recognizing, okay, they haven't taken those next steps. Why? Why haven't they done those things? Was this a confidence thing? Is this a competence thing? Is this like, I don't have time to, I don't want to, right? So I have to kind of unpack all those things to help them succeed. Now, eventually it's the question is, when we're talking about, coaching and helping people move forward with their own goals, is how much of that do you really want to, and what is the sense of urgency for you? Because if you're just and really that's just a moment in time for you to gripe at me because I'm that sounding board at that particular moment, but it really doesn't matter. I'll ask you, like, well, rate this for me on a sense of urgency, 0 to 5. 5 is like, I got to get to this yesterday. Because that'll tell you yourself in terms of what is the pressure that you're feeling to actually pursue these next steps that we're trying to brainstorm here. And if it's a 1, like, okay, let's move on to something else that's more important for you that you want to tackle.
Well, because you can lead the horse to water, but you can't make them drink.
Yeah. So, that's all part of that coaching relationship that you have with people. And I'll just clarify that the coaching work that I do is more along the lines of people want to drink.
Yeah.
As opposed to go see Julia because you need help. Yes, right? Those are my least favorite conversations, where somebody says, yeah, you need to go see Julia because they themselves can't work with that person. Yep. So I don't know if that's a separate dynamic, but
did you have to like go through and figure that out as you were building your business? Like, how did you start start building that?
Great question. I had somebody call me before I started working at the college. She says, Julia, we need you. And it was a parochial school, a very small parochial school near the Detroit area. And I said, okay, well, what are you looking for? I got to get rid of a teacher. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, tell me what's going on. She was a curriculum director, I believe, at the time. She was newly hired in the position. And I went and met with her, and she's telling me all these nasty things about this teacher and basically a toxic teacher, right? And they do exist. And she was hiring me as an external consultant to work with her so that she could get enough evidence. I was basically playing HR at the time, but she was using me as someone that would sit in her classroom and watch this person teach to find things wrong with this person. Mm-hmm. And it felt terrible.
Oh my God, I bet.
It felt terrible.
Yeah.
Because I come with good intentions. Yeah. Like, what in the advertising of my consulting that you figured out, like I was going to be that person,
Yeah. Yeah.
And it really sent me like a bad brand image of myself. Like, what is this woman now going to do? Like, I met Julia and she basically
is looking for a way to get me fired.
Got me fired.
Yeah.
And I realized that, and she did. She got herself fired. She did herself in. The director ended up firing her for other reasons outside, but she was basically using me as a mole. And I hated it.
Yeah.
And I decided at that moment, if I'm going to be working with anybody, I don't care if it's internal employee, as an external consultant, I'm not going to be that person for you. I can coach you to kind of figure out that system that's going to work best, but you are the primary person responsible for this team member. I am not.
Yeah, I love that.
So I kind of released myself from that burden and really laid some groundwork, and knowing that I don't think I guess for her goal, it worked, this teacher, but what was that journey for that teacher? It was terrible.
Terrible. Yeah.
Yeah. So she's going to remember that place that she worked as terrible. And I wouldn't want that for anybody.
No. and again, whether she's burnout, she's toxic, she's terrible, it's just like going back to the bringing the human into it. It's still a poor human practice.
Yeah. And I didn't want to be a part of it. Now I know HR gets ugly. I really do. And I know people do stupid crap when they're at work. I do. People make poor judgments.
You've probably seen it. Yeah.
People, I talked earlier about my journey from teaching. Like I was probably one of those people for a while, and it was because other things were going on. Like I was getting really anxious, and I knew that like I had outgrown certain things, but I was using my current environment to showcase that I know better now, and I know what to look for in other people. And I will often say like, well, I was that person, 15 years ago. And let me just tell you what's maybe going on in this person's mind. They're going through a struggle. They're maybe just having that, is everything okay conversation, as opposed to like, you're pissing me off, I'm going to fire you. That would have been really appreciated at that point. And so
no wonder why it was so hard to go in and sit and do that. One, it's a horrible position anyways, but to understand and like even have empathy for this person.
Right. And I did, which made my job even harder, because I could see some of the toxicity that was there, but also I'm like looking at a mirror of myself sometimes of what happened, years prior, and saying like, oh, what would I want somebody to do for me now?
Yes. That's the biggest thing. And it's kind of jokingly, but it's so true. Nobody wants to go to work and suck. Nobody wants to go to school and suck.
Mm-hmm.
There's other stuff going on internally that's causing those external problems, and we're not sure how to deal with them.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're coming off as a jerk, or whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
We're coming off as being a poor performer.
Yeah.
What's going on, and can we fix it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, there are some people that don't want to, right? But there's other people that they just need somebody.
They do. And I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is giving yourself the space to listen to somebody else.
Yeah.
And there's a huge power in that someone is taking the time to listen to you.
5,000%. It's the biggest human need, in the sense of being seen, felt, heard. I have this friend that a few years ago, I was on her podcast, and she was like, "This is the first time I've been able to come out of my house in a while. I've been taking care of my mom. Her mom had dementia," and she was like, we're finally at a place where I can leave. And I was like, well, what's different? And she was like, we hired this lady to come in and take care of my mom. She was like, and she comes in, she takes care of my mom 5 days a week. And she was like, and me and my dad were both like kind of hesitant to leave her alone, because she forgets who we are sometimes. We don't want to just leave her alone with this lady that she doesn't know and that she's going to freak out. And so we took her like a 2-week period where we kind of hung around while she took care of her. I'm like, well, what's different today to where you feel completely comfortable to leave the house? And she said, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. She's like, this lady just comes in and she's 100% committed to my mom. She's not anywhere else in the world. She's listening to my mom's stories. She's laughing at her jokes. Genuinely, she's asking her more follow-up questions. She wants to know more. She's there for her. And she's like, it made me think. She was like, I love my mom. She's like, but I've heard her stories over and over again. She was like, I want to be there for her, but I've also got my business that's going on in the background. So I'm checking my phone, or I've got people messaging me. And so I'm checking it. And she's like, my dad too. We've got other things going on. And so we're not 100% committed to my mom. And she was like, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. She's like, this lady shows up and my mom doesn't know who she is, but she cries tears of joy because she's so happy to see her. And it's because it's fulfilling that human need, is that we just need someone to listen.
Yeah. Yeah. I read a book, just short of COVID, all that happening, and it was about connections. And the book like fell into my lap, and it kind of outlined, some theories about how human connection with yourself and your values and your work and having purpose and the world around you, and of course, other people plays a part of it. And how when we lose an element of that connection, which COVID like checked all the boxes for things.
Yep.
How, and this is no surprise probably to people who struggled with mental health issues during that time, it's because everything was basically stripped away from you.
Yep.
And that book was very enlightening to me, but also very helpful for me in some of the coaching work that I do, as far as whether it's team member to team leader, right? You have to continue to build that connection. And what is the connection? And if you're finding like, okay, there's a disconnect here, well, that's another, like just the opposite of the term. How do we reconnect? What are the small steps that we can do? Do we reconnect about our values? Do we reconnect about our purpose for work? Do we reconnect with, what we know to be true even? And so all of those elements made an impact on me, not just, getting through COVID, but at the same time, how I'm actually engaging with other people that want to engage, right? That see the same value and the need for connection, because it was so easy to disconnect. And we still see the effects of that. Like people's habits just, they choose not to engage anymore. And when we talked about that first quarter of student experience in the classroom, first quarter of getting a new job is really making sure that we do what we can to invite engagement in every possible way, because we know that it's an element of our personal well-being and helps us actually do really great things together.
Oh, so awesome. Mm-hmm. It is, and employees can be different people in different places, depending on that leadership and that culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's the job of leaders to really foster that connection culture, right? And what is the result of that? I heard somebody say the other day about, we've become so process focused and not outcomes understood, right? Like, okay, we're going to go through these processes, but for like what result or to what end, right? So even as a teacher, I thought that like, I'm going to go through all of this work to get this minuscule result. Like that's probably not worth it for me, or I'm going to take a lot of time, but the payoff is going to be amazing, not just for me, but for the students, and it's going to have residual to it. So I try to look at it with both of those lenses, like engaging in that process. If we're going to engage in processes to commit to connecting, the payoff is going to be huge, right? If it's done right to the sweet spot where it's meaningful for both people.
That's awesome. So how do you engage your clients? I want to know more about this.
Engaging with my clients, it's twofold, having a consulting business, but then also working at the college sometimes they come to you, right? Yeah. Like, okay, I know Julia's out there, but then with clients, it's really been a lot of word of mouth and understanding, I'm probably one of the few people in the state of Michigan that does what I do as far as really making commitments with leaders to be able to support them on a regular basis. And it's based on things that are important to them, important to the school, and important to, the district at whole, right? And so again, it's that connection. It's making sure that there's consistency in the communication and there's a cadence to how we actually communicate with one another. So a lot of times, the client will hire me or have heard about me in the educational space and be able to say like, hey, we want to work with Julia. We're going to work with these educational leaders to really support, XYZ goals, right? And then we just start the relationship. I have a few questions that I ask them about work-life balance, what do you love most about what you do? What do you not like about what you do? So it's very career and like job focused. But I will say resoundingly in both of those cases, it always delves into, I got some other things going on. Like you said, there's the whole person that shows up to work. And when I find at times that somebody is just talking about what happens with them at work, they're specifically not telling me things that would have been really helpful as a coach to know to kind of balance that out. Because when you leave that information out, and this is great for your listeners, like you're thinking about working with a coach, like kind of be prepared to bring your whole self to the table because it's a little vulnerable. Yeah. But your coach is there to be the non-biased partner to think through things. I have a coach. Yep. I have a health coach, and we don't meet all the time, but when I need her, she's there to be able to support me. And it's a great 15, 20 minutes that I have. It doesn't take an hour and a half or, it's just a touch point for me. Like, I kind of feel like I'm struggling here a little bit. She'll ask me those 2 or 3 key questions. Like, doggone it, I should know these things, but thank you for the reminder and the boost of like, okay, now I can refocus on what I really want to accomplish.
How powerful are questions?
how powerful are questions?
I say a lot of times we feel like we have to have all the answers, right? Like we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be really smart, but like how powerful and impactful are questions? Yeah.
So when you say that, I'm like, okay, let's distinguish between like the terminology of consultant, and coach, and mentor, right? So in my HR world, I got a lot of experience in understanding HR frameworks and how HR functions to help employees be their best selves at work and making this a great employee experience. So I can operate usually in all three camps, right? I can be a consultant. I can teach you how to do things. I can coach. I can ask really poignant questions to help you figure things out yourself. And I can also mentor. I can kind of help guide you and lead you as an expert in certain things. But when it comes to other areas of coaching, I might not be that expert, but I am an expert coach. And I know how to formulate questions, and I know how to navigate conversations to help you get from point A to point B. And sometimes even point C, like even beyond that, okay? The consulting work is more along the lines of, I have some level of expertise, but eventually you're going to do it. I can offer a suggestion. I might not have expertise in that thing, but I can offer a suggestion to you. That's like what you said before, telling people kind of what to do. Sometimes I'll have research frameworks, or I'll show people like matrices and stuff like that. So I'm operating as a consultant, but then I turn that into a coaching conversation, right? I'm going to lay just like a common understanding that we have about something like Stephen Covey's work on waves of trust is a basic one. It usually crops up within the first 2 or 3 conversations that I have with somebody. Like, okay, you're struggling with this. Let's kind of let me just show you something, right? And see where this germinates. So yeah, I can act as like 5% consultant, but then eventually it leads to coaching in terms of, now let's prompt the conversation between the two of us to help you with your thinking and what you're going to do with that, right? So I have to delineate those 3, and sometimes I have to tell the person I'm coaching the delineation, because they will treat me like a consultant, and I'm like, okay, I'll play for a little while here just to make you feel better. But eventually, if it sits in that realm too much, I did have a client that was like that, like, I don't know what I should do, Julia. Is that the right thing to do? I'm like, I don't know. Does it feel right to you? What about this are you hesitant about? And so I'd have to eventually, like, sometimes I would have to affirm, like, yeah, it looks pretty good, And sometimes, eventually I would have to be like, you've asked me that question the last 3 times that we met. And I'm really wondering, what is the hesitation that you keep coming to me for validation on something? So then we start digging into the hesitation. It isn't even about the thing anymore. It's about the consistent behavior that I've seen over the last 3 coaching sessions to really understand, like, you keep defaulting to me instead of taking ownership of this decision. What's up with that? Yeah, and if you ask my friends, they'll probably say, like, dang it, she asks questions all the time. And I do, and I kind of hate myself for it sometimes, because that default coach comes out. Yeah. I said I came back from vacation over the week, and my friends were joking like that first day, and they're like, so what do we have here? That's a Julia-ism. And I'm like, I do that? They're like, yes, you totally do that. Like, so how do you feel about that? So they're mocking my coaching, and I'm fine with it. But at the same time, it's a reminder, like, I got to turn it off sometimes.
I realize the place it doesn't fit is in your marriage.
I can concur with that, Jason. Specifically at heated conversations where you're like, I'm just going to turn my coach on, and they say, stop doing that. Stop with your questions.
One day Gracie looked at me, he's like, I'm not your client. I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. So like, do you want me to listen, or do you want me to,
That's really great. I do the same thing. Yeah. Like, I am listening to you, and this coach just turned on because it's 4:30 and I just got off a call with somebody, and okay, so I'm still in that modality, and I will have to ask, like, what do you need right now? Because I could be coach, I could be consultant, I could be really your wife and tell you exactly what you need.
Yeah, exactly. So authentically your wife.
Yeah. Just strip all that stuff away and just be like, doggone it, don't do that.
Which position do you want?
Right. Let me move over. Let me move to a different location of the table so I can adopt a different identity. And I think you know what I'm talking about. For those of you that don't, like, you take a stance. You go in a certain position of the room, and that's the person that you are. And that, like a certain end of the island, the kitchen island counter. When I stand here, this is the person that I am. But if I stand over here, I'm going to adopt a different persona. It works.
That's awesome.
Totally works. Like, okay, when you stand over there, I remember when you stood over there, you said those things, but when you stood over there, you were a completely different person. I'm like, So if I go over here, that's what you're going to get.
It's like a nice training. That's awesome.
It is. Actually, that was part of my training when I was a coach. I thought about it like it's been 17 years since I was trained as a coach. And they would tell you that, like, if you're going to give really crappy news to your students, don't stand in the same spot that you would teach. Because, and I did that when I told my students I was leaving teaching, I said, I got to stand right here because this is like the only spot that you'll remember me saying this to you. And it wasn't anything to do with teaching because we all remember where we were in 9/11.
Yep.
We all remember where we were when huge events in our life took place when we got that really crappy news.
Yep.
And, I've even been in spaces before where I had to sit in that same spot and I'd be like, I can't sit here because I know what I know about that space. And I'm brought right back to that. I don't want to call it trauma, but it was that experience or that memory that's just so ingrained in you that you're like, I might just need to look at this a little differently. So, if that's any tip for people as far as just how spaces impact, and I talked earlier about paying attention to the space of things and how important that is to kind of formulate the memories and the stories that you bring to the table.
I love it. That's such a good visual, especially when you tie it home. Like everybody remembers where they were at for 9/11. Everybody remembers where they were at, and like the same thing for like taste, smell, music. A song can take you back to a certain.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah. So, the memories do shape that storytelling. And, I was, just a couple of things that happened over the past couple of weeks where, it's really big in schools right now to talk about trauma-informed, teaching, like how you're paying attention to things. And I like to look at it a little bit differently when we talk about trauma. Again, one of the podcasts that I was listening to, it's a coaching podcast about building your coaching business and different ways to approach coaching and how to serve clients. And, some people think that, coaching is like pseudo therapy. It's like therapy light. And I'm like, not really. Although people have told me, like, I feel like I'm talking to a therapist. That's because you're recalling your memories.
Yeah.
But these memories are not rooted in like psychosis or like, I don't have a prescription pad for you. So the difference is, let's just look at them as memories that have shaped your understanding of reality. I'm not going to dive into the trauma behind it.
Yeah.
But if this is the way that you're remembering it and it's inhibiting you from moving forward with your life, we can certainly explore that. But I'm not going to be able to diagnose like mommy, daddy issues of certain things that have now impacted your life. And I that understanding that root cause of what those stories are, like there's a point where I just kind of have to be like, I'm probably not well equipped, even as a coach, to be able to dive into this. So when we talk about trauma-informed teaching practices, right, we look at it from like a deficit model. This is my personal opinion about this, and recognizing how teaching has become so like trauma-informed on the deficit side of things, like what students don't have, and the trauma. Like somebody could interpret like I'm in front of a camera right now, and that's traumatic, right?
Oh, for sure.
But I'm going to look at it like it was an experience that I had the chance to kind of put into my life story. I can decide, how I grew from that. Might not have been the most comfortable.
Yep.
Might have caused me a little bit of, flutters in my stomach and like, I'm not really sure what I'm going to say right now, but is it always labeled as trauma? And that's where I get a little like, because we continue to use that language, even as adults, right? Yep. My trauma or my anxiety. And I start to look at it like, wow, that's language now people are bringing it to the table. That's very deficit oriented.
Yep.
And I don't come to like rose-colored glasses. I'm a realist.
Yep.
This is really impacting.
It's really happening.
It's really happening, right? And then how you bring that story forward, even as I talked about my parents passing away in my early 20s, like some are like, oh, that must have been so dramatic. It was a really difficult time, like losing my parents at that point. And I had a younger brother and a younger sister that kind of felt like I had to take care of them. But at the same time, now it's my story. It's no longer trauma. It's, even in the moment I thought to myself, we'll get through this. I've got another life to live, 2 lives to live,
Yeah.
And so how do I choose to move forward from that? Like, that's not going to define me. That's not my story. There's so much else in there that's part of my story. But when we come to the table as teachers or educators or even managers with this sense of like, someone's always got a trauma. Well, everyone has a story.
Yeah, absolutely.
And why are we labeling that for them? Or why are they labeling it for themselves when somebody else is looking at it like, that was kind of a crappy time in your life, and I totally get it. But look where you are now. Look at the things that you've grown. You've chosen to make some of these decisions. And that's what learning is all about, is making sure that we grow and change.
Yeah. And if we don't, we're stuck. And I was that person, sort of what you said, I was this person. Like I was that person that was like stuck to my circumstances. And then I had this major realization, like my dad, I was an abusive guy and he committed suicide. And for years after, I was like blaming my circumstances on the way I was brought up and this guy. And I was like, wow, I have all this like animosity and hate, and I'm blaming and pinning everything on this one person that's no longer alive. That if I think about it, probably like wasn't thinking every day that he's going to destroy my life. He just had a lot of issues and he didn't know how to handle them. I'm not the victim. He was actually the victim because he never really thought that he could handle it to the point that he left the earth, by choice. And I get to raise my family and create a whole new cycle of things. Right. And wow, that's empowering versus being stuck by, I'm this trauma. Like, don't say this to me. It's gonna, trigger this to happen. Well, I've got to get past that, or I'm going to be just stuck in this spot.
Yeah. And that's what it ends up being, is people choose to stay a little stuck. Back to that connection piece. They choose not to bridge connections that are probably healthier for them. They choose to kind of stay in there. I mentioned earlier about coaching kind of being a therapy light, and we talked about, how do you get clients, or how do you engage with clients? That's one of those, and I, through research, I do research all the time on coaching. Like what's the ROI on this? What realistically are practices, one of them is a chart of how coaching is a great tool for like pre-therapy. And as an extension of mindfulness, that whole, like, I'm going to be mindful of like the texture of this table, or like, hey, I'm going to pay attention to my heartbeat and just be mindful of my heartbeat, right? All those practices, and you can listen to podcasts and you can listen to, apps and things like that give that sense of calm, right? To promote mindfulness. And that's like the basic, standard that we want. But then from that, when that doesn't work, like, I might need to talk with somebody that's a little bit more skilled in how to navigate the conversation and kind of help me through some things, just general life things. I'm not, sitting in a fetal position in my bed for 5 days in a row. I don't want to get to that point. I want to take some proactive approaches, and coaching really is an effective tool to do that. I don't care if it's 2 sessions. I don't care if you're in coaching for 5 years. I had clients for 5 years now. And they continuously move their needle.
Yes.
But as a pre-therapeutic condition, I'll have some like, are you talking to somebody else? Because that might be really helpful for you. Like, I can help you with this, but there seem to be some other things that I don't feel equipped that I can actually help you move forward with, right? And then as a downslope from that, like, what happens when you're done with therapy? Like, that is the goal, is not to stay in the therapeutic or that trauma state forever. You eventually want to get out of it. So kind of back to this idea of schools being this trauma informed, like, if we recognize the trauma, the idea is to get out of the trauma, not for it to be sustainable for your entire life.
Yeah.
So when I'm thinking about this from a well-being standpoint, my work as employee development, like, we want to focus employees on to incorporate well-being into their lives, right? And when they recognize something is kind of off kilter, like, how do they address it? How do they recognize it? How do they get treated for it if that's the case? So that they can move out of that state and go back into a normal, happy life that they envision for themselves. Because I don't think people imagine themselves living in a chaos-driven, trauma-laden state for the rest of their lives. I don't think anybody wants that.
No, I don't think anybody puts that on the
no, that's not
on the goals
my goal.
And dreams.
Yeah, I want to. I mean, there are some people that get very like into themselves and want like, woe is me sort of thing. I've known people like that.
Oh, for sure. But those people wouldn't tell you they want to be miserable. Those people would tell you they want anything more than anything. They want to be well, or they want to feel good, or they want luck. However, if when they're handed luck, they don't see it that way.
Right.
They see the world a certain way.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so, and I know these people really well, unfortunately. You can't put out all their fires because they even though they say they want this, internally there's a conflict.
Yeah,
there's a conflict inside there.
Yes.
That always is comfortable in the fire.
Yeah. I use that term like, hey, it's like having this little something on your shoulder about, kind of get the ick feeling. Oh, there it is. There's that ick feeling again. And it's always there as long as you let it sit there.
Yep.
But as soon as you go, I don't want that ick feeling anymore. And I'm okay, because I've experienced that too. I've experienced depression in my early 20s.
Yep.
Like it felt good to kind of dig into that ick feeling because that was a space that nobody knew what it felt like. And it was my own little, whatever you want to call it on your shoulder, own little pet friend, own little gremlin, if you will. Right.
Yep.
And as soon as you decide like, I don't need you anymore, gremlin, because I'm choosing something else. I mean, like a whole world of difference. So I don't know if that really encapsulates what you were talking about.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can choose it, and there are people out there that help you move forward.
Yeah. And you got to be like aware of that. Like when is that thing coming into my life that's really going to make a difference? And I get to choose. I get to choose that because I'm a believer like that happens more often than we're able to pay attention to.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. And then we just kind of like blow it off and say, oh, I'm at that guy at that, happy hour, not a big deal. This guy seems like he knows a lot of people. This guy seems kind of friendly. And I'm kind of curious about this local podcast. Like, Jason, how do I get on your podcast?
And that's exactly it. And then we had a conversation.
Yeah.
And that's all it is. And, it's taking that chance. It's going and asking that question. And I notice that like when you do that, the doors open up.
Yeah. I tell people too, I'm like, what's the worst that could happen?
They say no.
Jason's going to say, yeah, that sounds great. And then we end up trying to schedule something and it doesn't work out. Yep. Like, I'll try again. But if I know when to give up, something else is out there for me, it just didn't work out. In this case, it did. And so I tell people that too, like, okay, you're thinking through this, but let's be honest. What's the worst that could happen based on what you're kind of planning out here? Yeah. Oh, she could start crying in my office. Like, yep, if that's the worst thing that could happen, are you okay with that? Like, yeah, I'm okay with that. I got a box of tissues right here for her.
I always have clients that like will apologize for crying, and I'm like, if you're not crying in a session, I feel like we didn't do our job. Like we didn't do our work. I feel like, what did I do wrong? Did I not ask you the right questions?
Oh, I feel like HR when you're telling somebody like it's not going so well, like bring the box of tissues. If they didn't grab the box of tissues, no, I'm kidding.
Exactly.
If they didn't grab the box of tissues, maybe they're throwing something against the wall. That's the worst thing that could happen, that you might break a lamp, in the grand scheme of things. Was it really so bad? You'd wish that for that not to happen.
Absolutely.
And sometimes I'll say that, okay, so let's try to avoid the worst thing. Let's kind of prompt this with an intentionality. Let's prompt this with like, I hope that today is really helpful for you in working through XYZ, right? And kind of reminding of that intentionality of the conversation to avoid the worst thing that could possibly happen. Like we said, putting it out there in the universe to kind of make it happen. And then people start thinking, well, they don't want to see me upset. They don't want to see me cry. They don't want to see me, throw something across the room. So they've already set the positive intention for the conversation, although it's going to be a difficult one.
And then there's a reverse side of like stacking that win. Like you go and you take that action and you ask to be on the podcast, and not you per se, but somebody goes and does that thing that they've been stressing about. Mark that in the win and put that in like the memory banks of, because we can a lot of times stack the things and we think about the failures more than we think about the wins. Mm-hmm. Like
there's always a win.
There's always a win.
There's always a win. I was telling you before about this podcast, my hair was in a rat nest because it was windy that day. Yeah. And I felt like I had to there were 4 people and I felt like I was kind of captured. And
oh yeah.
But you know what? I watch that podcast every so often, and I posted it again on my social, and I was like, that was a pretty cool podcast. The more I watch it, the more I can be like, yeah, I can see that, and I can see that. And I was grateful for the colleagues that I was sitting with at the time, and I tagged them. I'm like, this was so fun. Let's do that again.
That's
right?
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you take a kind of ick situation and ask yourself, really, what's the worst that could happen?
What's the worst?
Was the worst thing that could happen was somebody's going to notice a rat nest on the back of my head? I'll take that one.
And if they do, they're not your people anyways. You know, like.
Yeah, no one reposted and said, what about that rat nest on your head? Did you comb your hair that morning? I didn't get any of that. No.
Nope.
Yeah, it was all good.
we get so caught up into our thoughts and like how we look and how we appear. But then we go out and we say that super motivational thing that inspired somebody, and you know.
I mean, I try to stay humble with that, you know, and just be very. I don't want to be that person that's like, she's so, you know, like always a tagline or a cliche, or, you know, I just try to be real with people, and people that know me and people that work with me know that, Julia, you just kind of, I wouldn't say raw, because you have to have a filter. You can't say everything that's on your mind. But the reality is, as a coach, and you know this too, is like, there are times you need to say the quiet thing out loud. And that is the one thing that helps move their needle. Like, crap. She said it, and I was thinking it, and nobody was going to say it until she said it. I had one client, you know, like 5 years ago, where we were working together for 3 months, and eventually it got to a point where I'm like, can I swear on this podcast?
Absolutely. You're
bullshitting me.
Yeah.
Like I'm getting your bullshit, and I've been dealing with it for like, I've been just kind of like going with emotions. I shouldn't say dealing with it, because that's not how I like to approach things. Like, and this is your journey, right? This is me walking with you on your journey, and you're kind of like giving me the crap outside. And I eventually said, she started talking about something. This is my most successful stories as a coach. And, you know, she's one of my great friends now. Is I said, time out. You keep kind of diverting into this other work-related thing, but I want to know, when you said, you know, you're having a hard time addressing these difficult conversations with your people. Why is that? Like, walk me through this. Like, why are you glazing over this? I don't remember the exact words that I said, but she knew I called her out on her shit, basically. Yep. And I'm like, I can't go on helping you do what you want to do if I don't call you out on this right now.
Yep.
Totally changed her professional presence, totally changed her mindset. Totally changed how she approached work and her care for people. Like, she knew it was inside of her, but that was like that moment. And I literally, the next time I met with her, I'm like, you look different. You got your hair done. You got your nails done. You're dressing different. You're not wearing sweatpants anymore. You know, and totally made the commitment to herself that if somebody was going to say this to her and be well-meaning and kind in doing it and not judgy, that was going to help her move her own needle. And it's been fantastic to watch her just like next level. Huge.
I love when you say like kind, because a lot of times people think that being kind is like letting somebody skate by. And as a coach, it's different, right? But like letting people skate by, and they're telling you this thing and you hear it over and over and over again. I feel like it's the kind thing to reflect and ask that question.
If I'm going to tell you got spinach in your teeth,
oh my God,
I'm going to do it because I'm being kind. Like, I don't want you to walk around like that.
Oh my God, yeah. Yeah, literally the last episode we talked about this. Yeah.
And sometimes the kindest thing that you can do is to be real and to be honest with that person saying. I try to use as much data as I can with that. Like, I'll try to repeat certain things that they have said, or I'll try to kind of capture things over time. Like, what's the story of our coaching together, and recognize, you know, you've mentioned this every coaching session that we've had. This is something that we need to dig into, because it seems to be a barrier for you in terms of moving forward. Like, what's up with that? Let's talk about it. And when I can open up that door for people, like, it's okay to enter into that, because maybe before they felt scared or didn't know what to do, or felt inadequate, or felt like it was going to be a judgment of their leadership performance, or fill in the blank, whatever their ambivalence is to walking into that door. I give them permission to do that.
And I think that's the difference between coaching and therapy. It's those shifts and like the questions and, giving them the ability to move forward and shift their narrative.
Yeah. I mean, I've been to therapy myself. Obviously, I had my parents die in a very short amount of time, and I was younger and had to work through some things. And so it was helpful at the time. But I often wonder, like, if we're going to keep doing the same things and working with the same issues with the same results, like, is this really helpful? And I would say the same thing for coaching.
Absolutely.
I would say the same thing.
Absolutely.
Like maybe my techniques are not working. Maybe you need to hire a different coach. And I'm okay with that. My goal is to help you succeed in all the things that you want to do.
Yep. Yeah, some people get it, and they're for me anyways, they get it and they move on and they don't need anymore. And then there's some clients that are like 4 or 5 years that they'll come in, we work together much less often and they're shorter sessions, but they're still there.
Yeah, they need a little dose of Jason, I'm sure. Like I just need a little bit of something just to kind of keep me going. I got the new friend is no longer a gerbil. It's that partner. It's the mirror of me. It's that person that's going to look out for me and be well-intentioned to say, like, you can do this. It's okay. And kind of ask those thoughtful questions that help that person move forward versus say, no, you got to stay in this little hole here. You can't do that.
Yes.
Like when you have that gerbil on your shoulder, it's very, it's very debilitating for people.
Debilitating.
Yeah. And that's sometimes we come to the table with coaching with that, so just recognizing wherever that person comes to the table with and what they're looking for. So I hope we didn't get too off target as far as like the transition from teaching and that world, but that has been probably one of the most exciting things about my journey as a teacher is being blessed with, having great people and great leaders that saw the vision for how coaching can be really helpful for teachers.
Yeah.
And I know that the teaching system still has coaches that are really working with students and success coaches and instructional coaches. Like there's so many coaching identities that are going on there. But, I think one area that gets neglected is that leadership coach from a principal or a school administrator or even that middle level manager, because we're making the assumption like they've done the job for a while. They have great skills in doing the work. Maybe they have managerial skills, but then from that, are they a leader and can kind of motivate their team to kind of do their best work, and how they do that in a coach-like way? I think that's maybe the pocket of space that I would still love to continue to fill and almost disrupt a little bit, because there's this notion or this is expectation like you're a building leader and you've got it all figured out. And I'm here to tell you that they have just as many imposter syndromes and, questions and hesitations as somebody that's, working in the classroom. Probably even more so.
I was going to say, would you say more? Just because there's more on their shoulders.
Yeah, there's more coming at them. The boiler's broken and
there's more expectations, more eyes on them.
Yeah, a slip and fall. Then you got 15 parent emails, and then you've got a meeting that you've scheduled that you've got to run, and there's a lot going on. Like seriously, one of the reasons why I didn't become a principal is because of that. Like I'm way too focused, and I like to help people get focused on things. Even in the midst of all the chaos, right? So that role, I mean, any parent that goes into a principal meeting and just wants to chew them out needs to take a beat, because these are individuals that are well-intentioned. They want what's best for students 100,000%, and are working with teachers to help them build their best instructional practices and do what's best for the district. I mean, that many layers, and we're talking about maybe 40 teachers, sometimes 400 or more, if we're talking about a high school, it's a lot, right? And imagine trying to go to sleep at night when you've got that weighing on you. I don't know how.
Yeah.
I don't know how sometimes.
Wow, no kidding.
So having a coach, having that person that's going to talk to you for 30 to 45 minutes every couple of weeks is probably a breath of fresh air for them.
Tell me about that, because that's got to be light. That's got to light you up. I look at like empowering the empowerers, and that fills my bucket. It's like that's really what that's doing.
Yeah, it totally is. It's very exciting to know that somebody trusts you to have that conversation with them, and you don't know their day to day.
Yeah.
Right. But you're there to say, I got you. When you're kind of like asking these questions for yourself, or you are like, I couldn't sleep for 2 nights because I got this weighing on me and I know I can do something about it. I want to do something about it, but I don't know what to do about it. Like I'm being pulled in different directions. So having that thought partner is just to like, sometimes it's a dump of like, I got to listen for 15 minutes just in terms of understanding the nuances of the situation. And then my job as a coach is like distill this down to what's most important for you or what's most urgent for you. Or, how is this impacting your value as a person or your value of your leadership? Like break this down for me. So I really have to listen and I really have to help them slow their thinking down because they're moving in 100,000 different directions. Okay. So that's what that space does. And if anybody's saying to you, but I got this and I got that, they got to tell themselves like, I'm missing out on the ROI of this coaching for myself because I'm so busy trying to it's like the big rock, small rock. You've heard that one before, right? Yep. We got this little glass and like, are you going to put the big rocks in first and let the little rocks just kind of, are you going to put the little rocks in first, all the little emails and things that you need to send, then try to fit the big rocks in there, right? Yep. Your own wellness and your own leadership is the big rock. Yep. Let's face it. That's what you're there to do. So again, sometimes it's just giving people the space and the permission to have those thoughts, to have those gripes, to have those like, I'm stuck. And even though I'm a leader, I don't have to have it all figured out.
What do you think is the biggest hurdle to them taking that time for themselves?
Well, most of them, because I get hired in by their leadership, says, we want you to take this time.
Yeah.
We want you to say, put a sticky on your door that says, I'm coaching right now.
Yeah.
So having that person's leader be a huge advocate for coaching is like top, ingredient
it's part
number
of the
one.
Culture.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're trying to foster is that culture. And when the leader says, this is the culture that we want to encourage is thoughtfulness, meaningful reflection, really highly structured conversations, right? You're going to learn a little bit of coaching in there along the way, but to be able to do that is really helpful when you've got that permission from, your district leader or your boss, let's say. It's like, okay, they're doing coaching right now. That's their space to be able to do that. That's huge. And then the other one is recognizing what is the value that I want out of the coaching relationship. It isn't just a thing or a conversation. You really have to make it meaningful for yourself. So when I said you kind of have to bring your whole self to the table, if you're going to put up your own barriers or own limitations, that is the only thing that you're going to get out of it. But realize it might not fill your entire bucket. It's just going to fill that one spot.
Open up.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not asking people to be overly vulnerable and tell me all the details.
Yeah.
But really what's going to help you make the impact that you want, and for some people it is just in this lane, but I do find eventually that there's other tentacles to what's actually happening. So my goal isn't necessarily to know all the things, but really know the things that are going to help me facilitate the conversation with you to help you move forward.
Understanding what they want out of it.
Yeah. Yeah. True. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. That sounds like, again, amazing work.
Yeah. It's a gift. When I tell people about how I received the training and, I called my husband and said, this is going to change my life, and really recognizing that I was given, the gifts. It was just a matter of what I was going to do with it. I was just going to throw in the trash. I was going to put it on the side of the road and come back to it later. Or was I going to carry it and nurture it and feed it and, kind of baby this in terms of like, what is this going to turn into? How am I going to continue to foster that? And so that started 17 years ago. And here I am, a consulting business and a great job and the opportunity to talk with a variety of people and meet great people, right? So, the other part is that volunteering where I'm like, my bucket's not completely full. And I get this opportunity to work as a volunteer in HR and
awesome. Yeah.
to meet wonderful people. And it's great. Sometimes it's overwhelming. I do like my plate full. I will say that. But at the same time, it's recognizing like, what is this feeding into? Who is this serving? How is, obviously I'm benefiting from the fact that I get to meet people and that's wonderful. But I see this as a service too. Like people will say, Julia does that thing. And like, how can I learn from that? And how can I do more of that? My goal is, when I got trained as a coach is to inspire other coaching, right? Like it's not to just keep that skill for myself. When I get the opportunity to help people develop their own skills so they can do it with other people, that's the greatest return that I could ever ask for. When I see that with my kids, even like, okay, he's kind of coaching the girlfriend, and a couple of things in this conversation. I'm like, I think I had a hand in that. I think I maybe fostered that a little bit.
It's so awesome.
Yeah. So that's the best gift.
That is amazing when you're modeling it and then you see what you're modeling, especially as a parent.
Yeah.
Because you don't always know if it's sinking in, and then to see it happening, that's incredible.
They will be the last people that will give me the pat on the back. No.
Like, I know that's mine. I know it is.
Just tell me, you got that from me, right? Maybe.
Now, did I read you do something with this too?
I do. Yeah. So a couple of years ago, and I've done DISC before as far as just filling out the surveys and the assessments. And, ever since I was a kid, I always loved doing that, like at the back of Teen Magazine and like, answer these 5 questions to figure out who you are. Like, okay, I'll do that. So I've always enjoyed that part of it. But now as a facilitator of DISC, so the 3 areas of DISC is everything workplace, just the general, like how do I help teams understand themselves as that self-awareness piece. Like this is what I bring to the table and I'm okay with it, right? It's not always pretty. It's not always, helpful. Sometimes they talk about, like, here are your fears. Like, oh, I don't want to address that, but it's real. It's very, very real. And most people are like, okay, this was like dead on for me. And they start to see it play out in work. And then there's the work of leaders, which I've done before for people to really help them understand, like, as a leader, what are some of those basic areas that are on the DISC model that help you be a great leader? They break it down to you have to have a vision. You have to build alignment and you have to build execution. And how do you do that within the dynamics of your environment and the tools that you have? And then the third product that comes with DISC, and that is the productive conflict, right? Mm-hmm. And that one's always interesting. I think it scares people sometimes, like, oh, we don't have conflicts, but I avoid that side of the room, And
I'm going to pull Susie in and ask her a bunch of questions. I'm going to uncover some conflict here real quick.
So people kind of like avoid that one. So I bring that in, I sprinkle it in, just kind of recognizing the basic model of, how you show up for work in that regular DISC model. Like I'm a hard D, I'm a hard dominant, right? Mm-hmm. How I approach conflict is not the same as someone that's an S who's a steady, who really likes things just like they want to make people happy, so where does the oil and water kind of come to this happy medium and recognizing, I know that you're an S, but so I have to come to that differently. I have to recognize what are the stimuli and what are my triggers. And then there's that space in between that says I get to choose how I respond to it. And that's just basic human condition. Mm-hmm. But we don't allow ourselves enough space for thinking I can choose how I'm going to respond to this. Like, a great example is like you get that email from, Ed over in the corner office who's known for firing off emails, and you're like expecting it and you just want to fire one back, or you just want to slam your computer, or just like not do anything because it's going to piss Ed off, right? It's going to piss him off.
The passive aggressive move.
Right?
Yeah.
And so how do you find space for like the right way to meet Ed where he is and to address, you're not addressing the conflict per se, but you're really choosing how you're going to respond to what is your perceived conflict. Somebody else might look at Ed's email and go like, oh, that's Ed. I'm just going to reply to it, no problem, because he just wants like a 2-word answer. And so yeah, it's really recognizing how you come to the table and what are those triggers, from the other person's perspective, and then saying like, how do I choose to engage with that?
At the end of the day, and it's like add questions. We've talked a lot about questions and the power of questions, mm-hmm. but it's that communication in really even understanding how people best communicate.
Well, I think, when we talk about that conflict piece of it, most people say like, I just want it to go away. Like avoidance is the best way to deal with conflict. Like I want Ed to go away. I don't want to have to deal with him anymore. But the reality is when you put it front and center and say, conflict is not a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
We should look at it as an opportunity.
Yep.
We should look at it as a reflection of us and how we're coming to the table, like who we are, the stories that we tell ourselves. Like Crucial Conversations says that 100%. Like, what is the story that we're telling ourselves right now in that particular situation that's causing a conflict? So, yeah, that psychology and understanding, how do I slow this down in my brain before I react and actually cause the conflict, right?
Yep.
And that happens in coaching too. People are like ruminating about something that's causing a conflict or a stoppage or a roadblock from them from moving forward. And it's really slowing the conversation down. I know that sounds like difficult for people when we're in such a fast pace, my phone's blowing up type of world.
Yeah.
But really the benefits to that are truly long-term, long-standing, and sustainable over time once you've kind of reconditioned your mind to be like, I kind of need to slow this down a little bit. And you don't need the coach to tell you to do that, right? When you can finally do it yourself.
Well, that's huge.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that is another goal of mine too, is like you've developed enough self-reflection, self-awareness, self-regulatory strategies that you don't need that type of coach anymore. You're very in tune with who you are. Let's move to the next stage of coaching that's going to be more beneficial for you.
Well, it's almost going back to the parent analogy of like, you see it working, they get it, they're proficient in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you look for those points. You pay attention to your client. You pay attention to the person and it doesn't have to be your client. It can be your employee. It can be your team member. Like, okay, this is actually working when they slow their thinking down just even for 15 minutes, just to kind of recenter. And I'm not saying ignore. I'm not saying, find other unhealthy means of dealing with that. It's just really being in tune and giving yourself the tools that you need to work through that. Yeah.
Huge.
Mm-hmm.
It's huge. This has been a phenomenal conversation. Thank you so much for coming down here and really, again, I love that journey in everything that you discovered. And it's funny. Did you when they first signed you up for the coaching? Did you see yourself kind of going down this journey?
No. I thought it was just a thing, like an initiative. Like I kind of wanted to be part of it. I had to push my way in to do that one. It was like, we've already got our cohort. And I'm like, I think I really want to do that. I think that's going to be really powerful. And I want to hang out with these girls that were my friends at work. And we had a great time. And it was life-changing.
That's awesome. It was like a kind of like disco hangout with my friends at work.
It was. They were like, hey, we get to go up north. We get to hang out at the college. We get to go to the bar. We get to,
Sold.
Yeah. And,
so then to have a life-changing experience come out of it on top of it.
Awesome. The life-changing part of it too, Jason, was the fact that I kind of grew away from that group. And I think that's part of it too, is when you attract onto something that's healthy for you and it's going to help you grow, sometimes you got to let go of something else too.
Yes.
Yep. I didn't like doing that.
Yep.
I liked staying in that zone. I really liked being empowered by my colleagues, but I knew eventually that was going to wear itself out. And this other thing came along and I'm like, I had to make that decision to let the other thing go. Yeah.
It's tough. And it's like one of those things of like people saying, oh, you changed. And yes. And it's unfortunate that you didn't, and it's nothing against people, but like, if you're growing, you're becoming a different person. And if they haven't changed or moved, you have to let it go or you're going to be pulled back down. Yeah.
And it's not that I didn't enjoy that time with my friends, but I had outgrown that time with my friends.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's okay.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, because it's new experiences, new friends.
Yeah. Yes. A world of new friends.
You said, he knows a lot of people and that kind of thing. I didn't know any of these people 7 years ago, 7.5 years ago when I started my business. And it was like, this part is my favorite part is having that opportunity to go out and meet people and build relationships and have these connections with people that I didn't know. Mm-hmm. And people that have come in and changed my life that, again, 7 years ago, I didn't even know existed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we talk about that story and being open to listening to other people's stories.
Yeah.
Then that becomes our story. Like, I met this great guy and he told me a great story and I want to share that story with you because it might be meaningful for you, or it's just maybe me sharing out loud what I learned from it. Thanks for listening.
Huge. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Julia, this has been so awesome.
I've had fun.
Man. Me too. Thank you.